Everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Migraine Mentors minicasts. We are your hosts, the Migraine Mentors, and the band is back together. I've got my amazing colleague, Dr. Miyasaka, here with me, and it's good to finally be back with the dynamic duo here.
Hell yeah. Always good to be together, man. How are you? How's the dad life?
The dad life is good. Hendrix is smiling and laughing and all the things and giving us more sleep than we thought that we would have in the early stages, so we'll take it. 4 month sleep regression is coming up, so if I look like I have bags under my eyes moving forward, you know why. So can't complain too much on that. And I know everyone here on this is not here for me with parenting advice, but they're here for us to talk about this, which is migraine. So, Thompson, what are we going to talk about today?
I think we should talk about the anatomy of migraines and kind of what parts are involved and the different processes and the type of things that you maybe can do during those parts. I think that would be helpful. What about you?
I'm in. Sounds great. When we were talking about this episode and like one of the things that we maybe haven't talked about enough or covered as much as we maybe could have or should have is just kind of like the back end of migraine, right? So as somebody who has a migraine, like you know what it feels like. You've lived through it, unfortunately, and you understand like all of these phases and processes. But when you really understand the condition and understand what's actually going on, sometimes it can kind of give you a bit more information as to what you can do for treatments. We're going to do just a really quick little anatomy 101 lesson here about what happens with migraine, inflammatory cascade, the neurological cascade that occurs, and just kind of cover some basics. So the first part of this is talking about like the trigeminal nerve. If you want to equate it, this trigeminal nerve is really a nerve that covers your face, kind of like this, where it has a first branch, second branch, and third branch. And this is kind of like the alarm clock, the hotline that propagates pain for migraine. This trigeminal nerve innervates your face. It also has innervations with the meninges, which is that covering of the brain. And so these are the superhighways that carry sensation from the meninges, from the face into the brain. And what happens is that these become sensitized over time and pain starts to get propagated. So that's kind of why you kind of feel that pain maybe in one side of the eye or the head or the face. It's that trigeminal nerve that you get to unfortunately blame for that. And then at that point, next, there's this area where you kind of get this like spark. This is like this slow wave that we would call this cortical spreading depression. This is often what happens with patients who get migraine with aura. So there's about 30% of the population who gets migraine that gets aura. And this kind of process is really important because this is where you get those visual changes, the numbness, speech glitches, vertigo. I mean, you kind of name it depending on the type of migraine variant you have. And to understand that a bit more, Dr. Miyasaka has a really good analogy that he uses to talk about cortical spreading depression. So, Thompson, can you just kind of give us that analogy that you've given us in the past about CSD?
Yeah, the analogy I like to use, if you think of migraines more like seizures and less like headaches, if epilepsy is kind of a tornado, going with the natural disaster route, I would describe migraine more as a forest fire that slowly burns, starts in the back, which is why most people with an aura will see the visual spot. It's called the scotoma. And as it burns, it kind of discharges every area that it goes over. So if those areas are healthy and can withstand a lot of activity, typically you won't get symptoms associated with those areas. If, let's say, your vestibular system, which means balance, is really unstable for a variety of reasons we don't have to cover right now. As the forest fire rolls through, it cannot withstand that activity and will metabolically fail temporarily and give you symptoms. So within this neurologic model that we talk about a lot, previously it kind of made it seem like there was way more variants of migraine than there actually are. Like there was vestibular migraine, which is one medication, and then it made it seem like ocular migraines were this whole different thing. But I think if this simplifies it a lot, it kind of includes a lot of migraines under the same umbrella, which I think is more helpful because then you can sort of more uniformly treat it. Not that, there are slight variances, but it just is much more revealing about what's actually unstable when you look at it that way. It tells us exactly where to go therapeutically, which is for us as clinicians is amazing.
Yeah, that's great. That's phenomenal. Once that CSD pattern kind of comes through, now we kind of get this like amplification process. So these trigeminal nerves in the face, they start firing erratically. And what they do is they release this compound called CGRP, calcitonin gene-related peptide, which is the reason why we call it CGRP. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's a messenger that really like opens up these nearby blood vessels. This is that vasodilation that people have always talked about with migraine, and it just cranks up immune responses, inflammation, and it just keeps propagating this pain process. So this is the exact mechanism behind why people actually take like CGRP blocking medications. If you can stop that process from happening, the thought process and the theory and the evidence is pointing to that you can actually stop a migraine attack from happening. Now, we know, as we've discussed ad nauseum on this podcast and with our newsletter, that there's so much more going on. And if your underlying fundamental baseline levels of inflammation are here, right? Well, just doing a CGRP is not going to lower them or immediately take them away, but it could stop that migraine attack from occurring. So, just another reason to continue to look into these underlying metabolic processes. But then this kind of last part is just really this kind of like letting the fire go loose, right? So, as Dr. Maisaka talked about that forest fire, combination of all of these signals create like this short-term local inflammatory response. The meninges, the covering of your brain, just become inflamed. These pain circuits become more reactive. Your brain just becomes sensitized. And this is at the point where you're like sitting there and you're like in your dark room, but like everything is still so sensitive for you, or you just feel like you need to like get away and take away all sorts of sensory stimuli. And this is hard because over time, what happens is your threshold for this, your buffer or bandwidth for all of these sensory processing can decrease. So now you're more prone to, having attacks. The attacks can occur more frequently. The attacks can occur longer. And so if you don't intervene, what can happen is this just kind of propagates itself over time. What's really interesting about this is that before the actual onset of a migraine, even before an aura, there's this kind of prodromal phase, this kind of early stage alarm clock we can equate it to, where hours or even days before pain shows up, a lot of people will notice like they're sleepier, they're more tired, they maybe have sugar cravings, neck tightness, even mood swings. And these are actually due to changes in the hypothalamus, which is kind of like your internal thermostat will equate it to. So these attacks kind of give you a cue early on for that process happening. And from a treatment standpoint, the earlier you can intervene, hopefully the faster you're going to see effects and the more you'll be able to stave off a full attack. So with that said, now that you've got the roadmap or the understanding of what's going on, let's turn to Dr. Miyasaka. And Dr. Miyasaka, what are really good steps for people to take throughout this process, whether they're in the earliest stages, the mid stages, or even the later stages of a migraine? I think it would be great to kind of just spill the beans a bit about your knowledge and wisdom about what you do to help patients and what patients have kind of educated us about as well.
Yeah, that's a great place to go with that information because it's as just listening to you describe it, it always just baffles me that when you look at it in that context, how people still categorize it as headaches is blows my mind. That being said, there are some helpful things at different stages. I know a lot of people that have been able to abort migraines in the sort of build-up phase. I call it the fuse. Some people call it the prodrome. Some people call it the aura. It's kind of nice. Migraine is such a terrible condition, and I think the higher power, whatever you label it as, is sort of taking pity on migraine patients in a little bit because they do give some a runway of, hey, you should probably go sit somewhere because it's about to get real for you real fast. And so in that build-up phase, I've found, at least from an alternative standpoint, a lot of the medications are specifically designed to be taken in that window. But cephaly, if trigeminal sensitization is an issue with you, which just means like the head and face pain aspect of it is just so gnarly and just so intense. Cephaly is specifically designed to be placed on the trigeminal nerve Dr. Reeves was telling you about in order to stabilize it so it doesn't become so hypersensitive as the attack comes through. It doesn't necessarily abort it unless that is like the only thing contributing to why you have them, which is super rare. I've only seen it once. But it can be helpful. Truvaga also is a really helpful thing that we use. It, I believe, designed to be both prophylactic, which means preventative, or as an abortive. And so if you feel your system start to kind of boil, I kind of liken it to a pot of boiling water. And if it overflows, you get a migraine. A Truvaga just helps turn the heat down so the water can kind of simmer and has a chance to kind of recover. Along the sensitization route, I mean, we could have probably an hour-long podcast talking about all the therapies. The one thing I've seen the most results with recently, and I also just made, not this following weekend, but the following one after this weekend, I'm on a summit talking about migraines. And in the research for that, sort of had a renaissance in belief of the histamine. The histamine, specifically if you have intense sensitization of this trigeminal system Dr. Reeves was telling you about. If you look at, like, if you really have true genetic migraines, there's a really good chance that you can't break down this chemical called histamine, which most people associate with, being allergic to things. I would challenge you to look at it as specifically food, as like almost having an intense peanut allergy. Like if you've ever been around somebody that has an intense peanut allergy, they are so vigilant and aware of where peanuts are or have been touched or may will be touched in the future. Like it's just such a constant thing in their mind that if you look at somebody with like a really intense allergy and they eat something that produces a ton of histamine, and then you take another person that eats something they're mildly sensitive to, but they just can't break histamine down, and you take a blood panel of both, like what's the difference, really? Like you have a ton of histamine circulating. One is because you're incredibly sensitive to it. The other is because you don't make the enzyme to break it down. And that I have seen people transform their lives when they grasp that concept. Like if you just firmly acknowledge you just have almost an allergy to things. Like imagine if you truly did have an allergy. Like if you just weren't aware that you were allergic to all these foods and then you stopped eating them, like your quality of life would improve immediately. It's like profoundly. And it has such a huge robust role in pain processing that it has such a tremendous opportunity to knock down the overall just intensity, in the same way that just stopping eating peanuts immediately would be like, oh gosh, I don't have these like throat closure emergency life threatening events anymore. This is weird. Like all I had to do was stop eating peanuts. It's like if you treat migraine as that, sometimes not all the time, it can
Mm.
produce these you know what I mean? Like if you just look at it as a condition where food is like the main thing that you should be concerned about, like it's gonna make a difference. Guarantee it. I've never seen somebody totally commit to the food route with this stuff and not one feel completely way more energetic and clear, but also have less migraines over time. So that's
Yeah.
a theme that you'll hear us talk about a lot. It's a good thing to close on is if you treat migraine almost like an allergic condition with food, like treat it as diligently as people with hardcore allergies do, that's an effective way to manage it. It's probably a little too hardcore for some people to start with, but we'll have a whole episode on like sort of the hierarchy of food related treatments. So to summarize, migraine so effectively with food, it's unreal.
It is unreal, and I feel like the best cases that we've had, I guess at least speaking on my experience, like the patients who've owned the food and the dietary changes are the ones who've made the biggest differences. And I feel like it's just time and time again we see it over and over. And yeah, there's neuro stuff, and yeah, there might be previous history of like traumas, concussions, whatever. But like when you hammer home the food and the nutritional component, it is an absolute game changer. So that's spot on advice for anybody listening to this. So and great clinical pearls from Dr. Mayasaka. So thank you for sharing that. It's just a phenomenal spot for us to end this episode. And this one was just packed with a lot of great information. So now that you know more, now it's time for you to be able to take action and hopefully see changes in your symptoms. So once again, we are the Migraine Mentors. We put out a newsletter every Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. Central Time, putting these podcasts out on a weekly basis. You're probably going to start seeing more of us from a social media standpoint as well too, because we're just trying to grow the platform and really just share the knowledge and experience that we put together over the last 20 plus years of clinical practice. For those of you who are subscribers to our newsletter, thank you, thank you, thank you for your feedback, support, and guidance. We wouldn't be here without you. And for those of you who are just finding us randomly on YouTube or any other platforms for podcasts, I mean, what are you waiting for? If you're somebody who struggles with migraine and you're looking for other answers, opportunities, and alternatives to the traditional Western medical model, then we're here to help and support you and guide you through that process. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again at the next episode.